Hello and welcome to the Kidlit Social. I am Laura Backus, publisher of Children's Book Insider, and I'm also with writeforkids.org and writingblueprints.com and a bunch of other stuff that we talked about before the recording started. But thank you for being here with me tonight. I'm happy to be here. We've got a new month. We're coming up on a whole new season pretty soon. And I always feel energized in the fall, so this is exciting. For those of you new to us, watching us for the first time, if you would like to get on our list to hear about all of our upcoming social guests as well as everything else we do, you could go to writeforkids.org/ultimate-cheat sheet. You'll get on our list and you will get a gift from us, an ebook that compiles all of our best advice from 31 years in business on how to get started writing for children. And that is your gift from us. And if you want to subscribe to our newsletter, Children's Book Insider, which is our flagship product celebrating its 31st year of publication, you can go to, I have to move my little bar out of the way here, writeforkids.org/CBI. And we have a special offer for you, $5 a month subscription. And you get the newsletter delivered to your inbox every month. It's about 20 pages on average, has marketing information, how-to articles, interviews with authors and editors, all sorts of stuff. We also have a spotlight interview every month, either an editor or an agent who gives us a special above the slush pile code that you can use to submit to them for 30 days and jump over the slush pile. And that is part of your subscription. And you get access to our CBI Clubhouse membership site with 31 years worth of information in it. So it's a great deal. And one of the things that we're going to do a special social on in the next few weeks is how to know if your manuscript is submission ready. And I just want to quickly mention this here. We have these above the slush codes every month in our newsletter. But if you see the code and it expires at the end of the month, that is not the time to start writing your manuscript and say, oh, I have to get it done by the end of the month so I can submit it. It is if your manuscript is far along the process, if you have done a bunch of revisions, if you've already had it critiqued, if you are working on the polishing stage of your manuscript, then you can say, okay, I have a deadline the end of the month to finish polishing this, come up with my great query letter, and submit it with the above the slush code. That is appropriate. But it is not the time to say, oh, I have this idea that I've been thinking about. I'm going to quick write it so I can submit it by the end of the month. It's very important that we submit our best work to editors and agents with these codes because we want the codes to keep coming. And so it's up to all of us to really honor that and know that there will be another code next month and the month after and the month after. So wait until you're ready and the right submission opportunity will come along for you, but you only have one shot with that editor or agent with this manuscript, so you got to make it count. Okay, now we get to celebrate. This is one of my favorite parts of the social here. I have some great celebrates this week. Catherine Payne, he's a CBI subscriber, and she announced the August 4th release of a board book that she wrote with her brother, John Payne. These Little Kittens in Hawaii was released by Hawaiian publisher Beach House Publishing. Catherine said, I'm grateful for the Kidlit socials because they educate and motivate me living in Guam. I look forward to the replays because of the time difference. So Catherine, I assume you'll be watching this on the replay tomorrow. Congratulations. Thank you for being a faithful social watcher, and congratulations on your book. Jean Ann Fennies writes that her yet to be published book, Coo Rumble, a Tiny Elephant, was chosen as one of the 8 finalists in the 2021 Pacific Northwest Association's writing contest for unpublished work in the children's chapter books and picture books category. Yay, Jean Ann. And winners will be announced later this fall. So fingers crossed for you. And I really hope you let us know if you win. We will definitely celebrate that with you. But this is a great milestone for you making the finalist cut. So congrats on that. And Karen Bourgeois wrote, I've been very busy this summer, spending 5 hours every day at my computer, and that includes weekends. Wow. My exploits have led me to finish 2 middle grade novels, 1 young adult novel, a blog, and a website. I'm putting the finishing touches on one of the middle grades and will be ready to submit to agents very soon. So Karen, you've put us all to shame. Congratulations on your incredibly productive summer. And here's the link to her website if you want to check it out. And Karen, thank you for mentioning the Kidlit Social on your website. I very much appreciate that. You can also find her blog linked to on her website there. So congrats, Karen. So I want to hear your good news. Email me at mail@writeforkids.org and put celebrate in the subject line, and we will feature your news on a future Kidlit Social. And I've been getting a lot of really great celebrates. I already have a whole bunch for next week. So keep them coming. I love to hear this, and no celebration is too small. We're all in this together, and we all keep each other going. Now I have an interesting link of interest here. A lot of you might be writing middle grade or young adult novels that have 2 narrators where you're alternating viewpoints and you're kind of telling 2 parallel stories. This is a great article about that. Dual point of view, what to know while you write, by E.J. Wenstrom, who's a young adult writer. Talks about all the things you need to think about, the considerations, the plot, angles, etc., when you have a novel with 2 narrators. And it's on Jane Friedman's blog, which I always recommend you should all check out, janefriedman.com. But the direct link to this article, if you want to go straight there, I did a bit.ly link, bit.ly/dual viewpoint. So check that out. Okay, now I get to introduce my great guest. So Katy Tanis is an illustrator, explorer, and children's book author. She wrote and illustrated the board book Love in the Wild, which, look at that cover. Is that not the most adorable thing you've ever seen? Published this past January by Mud Puppy. And she illustrated I Am the Jungle, a yoga adventure, and Animal Olympics. And her upcoming book that she has illustrated, Edward and Annie, which is due out next March from Thomas Nelson. She has also, if you go to her website, daughter-earth.com, you will see that she is multi-talented. She has not just done books. She's done editorial illustrations for magazines. She does stationery. She does puzzles. She designs fabric. She designs children's clothing. Oh my goodness, she's just so talented. And her website is a delight, so please go check it out. But here's what's really cool. She's currently pursuing a master's in biology through Miami University in partnership with Wildlife Conservation Society in the Bronx. Like she has time for this. She spends most of her days chasing deadlines, but occasionally wanders to far off places like Madagascar, where she chases primates instead. So her work is inspired. I'm going to show you some of her work here too. Her work is inspired by specific ecosystems and the wonderful webs of life that they contain. And so tonight, one of the things that she is very passionate about is accuracy of behavior and environment when you're depicting animals. Even if you have stylized illustrations, even if there's a sense of humor about them, the basic behaviors of the animals need to be accurate. And we're going to talk about that and how that affects both fiction and nonfiction. So, Katy, why don't you come on with me? Welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Hey.
For having me.
Sure. Thanks for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you about this. This is just such a great topic that we haven't really addressed, but it is so important. So we'll get to the whole accuracy in your research in a few minutes. But first, I wanted to just sort of have you tell us a little bit about you and how you came to be so multi-talented. Um, you have so many interests, you have so many, talents, including pursuing this master's now in biology. Which of these things came first and how do they intersect in your life? How can you possibly make them all work together?
I don't know the answer. No, I always was kind of exploring outdoors as a kid. I have 3 younger siblings, and my dad used to take us on hikes all the time. I remember I was always obsessed with the rainforest. I think I first read about them on the back of a cereal box when I was a kid. And I used to climb into the trees and put sprinklers in our trees so we could pretend we were lost in a jungle somewhere as kids. So I was always very interested in that. And I just think, going to college and stuff, I didn't really know that that was an option as a career yet then. So I think that was just a little bit not knowing that that was what you could study. And that's why I'm doing it now. And then I also always was into art. My grandma was a painter. My mom was very crafty. So we were always doing those kind of things. Writing definitely came later. I feel like I always have ideas and things I want to share. And I never really considered myself a writer, but then I kind of discovered kids' books and I was like, oh, this actually seems like the perfect format for everything I'm sort of doing. So still kind of learning on the writing end, I think.
Well, so the illustrating came first for you before the writing.
Sure.
So how did you get your very first illustration job?
My guess, I actually signed with my agent for I started this and I wrote a book and illustrated it, and then I didn't know what to do with it. And I had sent to the few publishers that had open submissions and got rejected from all of them. And my aunt was just harassing me, like, I want to see this book made. So I sent it to some agents and I really didn't know what I was doing. And I signed with an agent right away and I was like, oh, this is going to be easy breezy, great. And then it was like 7 years after signing with an agent before I got
Yeah.
so I feel like somehow I skipped the agent struggle that a lot of people had, but then it was still a really long wait before
Yeah.
I got my first book deal. But I'm pretty sure that my first 2 books, which I illustrated, came because they both had gorillas in them, and I had a lot of gorilla pictures on Pinterest, and I'm pretty sure they were looking for someone who could draw gorillas. And that's how I got the jobs.
Interesting. So Pinterest, obviously, as an illustrator, showcasing your work on social media is important because it's such a visual medium. And do you recommend Pinterest as a good vehicle for illustrators?
I think so. It's changed a lot since I first started using it.
Mhm.
So it's a little bit harder to get your stuff seen now.
Right.
But I still think it's a good option, especially it's still searchable, I don't think stuff shows up in a feed as easily as it used to, but I personally, as an illustrator, if I'm looking for stuff, I tend to go to Pinterest before Google because it's slightly more curated if I'm looking
Yeah.
for artsy things. And I suspect many art directors might do the same kind of thing. I didn't confirm this, but I am pretty sure that's how there's gorillas on the cover of two
Sure.
books. And
Well,
actually, so this illustration that ended up being the title page of this book, I had a very similar illustration that was very popular on Pinterest, and we just changed it a little bit for the title page. So I'm pretty sure they.
oh yeah. But see that just shows the power of social media. And what about Instagram? Do you use that?
So actually, this book, which I don't know, I guess it's a good time to talk about it, but this was sort of doesn't say much about my writing maybe yet, but I got this book deal based on the illustrations that they saw on Instagram.
Huh.
I did an art show with this concept, and all my art is very concept driven, so I can see how it leads into books, but they liked the concept of the art show and the stuff I was sharing on Instagram, and asked if I wanted to make a book out of it.
Mhm.
So a little backwards than it normally works.
But I think that is an interesting point because I think art directors will go to Instagram looking for illustrators if they have a specific style in mind that they want for a text. I know that some authors really hope that editors will go to their website and look at the synopses of their upcoming, their manuscript, their works in progress, and hope that they'll ask for that work. Editors aren't really doing that so much, but I think art directors are. They're really reaching out in social media. So that is just something, your illustrators out there, keep that in mind.
I think
As far
so,
as that.
especially if you like, illustrate the kind of books, everyone says that, but I mean, the kind of books you want to do, if they're looking for something in particular, I think
Yeah,
they're going to find you then if you have that illustrated.
absolutely. Absolutely. So before we talk about your research and all of that, when you are developing illustrations for another writer's text, is your process different than when you're developing it for your own text? Kind of walk us through the illustrator's process if we're, for those of us who are just writers and we want to understand the other half of the process.
Yeah, the process is sort of similar for me. I definitely have to have pictures and thumbnails before I'm even writing. Like I start visually and go back, and then I'll kind of go back and forth when I'm writing my own between my thumbnails and the manuscript. But obviously, if I'm illustrating for someone else, the manuscript's pretty much done. And I like I over research everything. I also love to just like collect so much inspiration. So when I get a new project, I take out a million books from the library. I start going through Pinterest for all these things and like just overstimulate myself, I guess, and look at everything. And then I kind of see what I'm excited about and what if I have any cool ideas for a certain spread, and then I kind of thumbnail it out and then go from there. So I always start with it. And I like to do the thumbnails pretty small so I can see them all at once and kind of go back and forth through that.
So when you get the manuscript, do you decide where the page breaks go in the text, depending on how you're pacing out the illustrations? Is that something you work on with the editor, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a little different for each one that I've done so far, honestly. So the one I'm working on now is they had a very clear set of where they wanted the page breaks. I Am the Jungle didn't have that so set up, but it was pretty obvious from the text where those page breaks would be, with like a little flexibility at the beginning and then. And then the Olympic one, that was pretty set in stone how they had its page break set up. So it kind of has been a little bit different. And even the ones that were a little bit more set, like if I had a suggestion that I thought would make it better, they were open to that.
Right. And were there any kind of art notes from either the editor or the writer as to what they suggested you draw?
So I didn't even know this was an option to working this. I Am the Jungle, Animal Olympics, brain fart. They actually gave me sketches. So they did sketches and layouts and I just turned them into my style and final artwork, which I didn't even know that was a thing until I worked on this one. So that was interesting and very different from the other ones. There weren't really, even like I Am the Jungle, I actually wanted a few art notes. Like I had to go back and forth through the publisher because a few of the yoga poses she mentioned were not, like if I Googled them, there was like a few different yoga poses, you know what I mean? So for the specific yoga poses, because I'm not a yoga person, I needed a little bit information on that. But other than that, no on that one. And then the penguin one, since that is in conjunction with the Shed Aquarium, they want to be very, like they wanted to make sure it matches their exhibits and looks like so there's a little bit more, and even that's not really, there's like a few art notes, but that's a little bit back and forth between the editors and Shed Aquarium and.
Right. Well, I imagine your experience, because you work on books that are basically nonfiction, informational books, or have that informational component to them, you might get more art notes than someone who's getting a fiction manuscript.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Because authors are always asking, can we put art notes in the manuscript? And I think that is the real difference between fiction and nonfiction. Sometimes the illustrator does want information from the author. It helps you with your own research or know, kind of where you need to start your research.
I would agree with that. And I feel like when it is a little more fictional, and sometimes honestly, a few of the art notes and even a few things I have found a few things in the text, I found restricting when I started to put, like when it was too descriptive and I started to like, it's silly, but it's like a simple line. I don't want to like call out a specific example. So I'm trying to think of one that, but, like you might not think about it, but I'm going to do a specific example because I can't think of anything else. But there was a line in the aquarium book where they said, and the otter like swam past the window or whatever. And it wasn't really necessary for the story, and that was there were so many options where the penguins had to be in front of the window for how the exhibits were set up. And this was one of the only options where I could have had a different point of view. So I really didn't want to put the penguins in front of the window again. And that was the only time that they mentioned the window was in that. So there is, when there is a little too much description, sometimes it can kind of, I felt like that. And they were open to changing that on that thread.
Yeah. So you said to them, can I put them somewhere else? It's not necessary.
Yeah.
And they were okay with that. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, there is times when it does feel a little restrictive, I think. But I don't know. I feel like it's it's a collaboration. So I
It is
think
a collaboration.
If they're in there and an illustrator really feels strongly.
Right. And it depends on the publisher and it depends on the editor. A lot of times editors will take art notes out of the manuscript before they give it to the illustrator anyway. But it also depends very much on the publisher. So I think that's interesting.
With that window one, you wouldn't have known it until I laid out all the other spreads and saw that like, oh, we have so many just in front, they wouldn't have probably even thought of that,
Right, exactly. So I know that research and authenticity of animals and in the environment is very important to you as far as books go. So why don't you elaborate on that for us a bit? I know you have some slides you want to show us to talk about this a little more.
Yeah, and I just want to like start out that I am not perfect either, and I make mistakes too. And this is what I've been sort of focusing on in school is how children's lit can help build eco literacy in kids and how it affects how people think about different species and the environment and stuff like that. I'm just going to start with an example. I drew 3 toes on this ostrich, and ostriches only have 2 toes, and I totally caught it beforehand and they didn't update it, so that's going to haunt me. But and I've broken my own rules for certain situations and whatever, so these are things I think we should consider when we're writing, illustrating our book.
Sure. Well, and I give you credit for acknowledging that the 3 toes, because I know several other illustrators who have done that totally by accident. They even did their research, but they just didn't catch that one detail. It happens.
Yeah, and I mean, these lions have rainbow manes and things like that. I totally
well, and when you get into the stylized illustrations, that's a different deal altogether. So we could talk about that, sort of the nuances there. Okay, great.
Cool. I'm going to share my screen.
And this, research and accuracy is just as important in the text as well as the illustrations.
Right. So this is not the right title slide, but I put a lot of effort into this for another presentation. So I thought
like it.
Title slide.
Well, I'm glad we get to see it.
This is a quote that I like, and I'm sure you've heard. In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. And that's where I feel like we can come in and really help people. And I'm sorry, I don't know how to say this man's name, Baba Diom. He's a Senegalese environmentalist. So one thing that I think we should think about, and that happens in a lot of books, is stereotypes of animals. And the wolf is a perfect example. We've all seen the big bad wolf.
Mhm.
And we now know, after the reintroduction to Yosemite and other places, how important wolves are to our ecosystems. Um, and like, the facts are, there's been, since 1915, there's only been 2 documented deaths by wolves in all of the US and Canada. But there's always like reintroduction projects, anything that's going to be close to someone's house. People are still scared of wolves, even though we know this information, because stories stay with us, and we get this preconceived notion from stories, and that creates fear. And I have this counterpoint here. We have deers always as little innocent animals, but 200 people die a year in the US with collisions with deers from cars. So it's just like something, you know, you don't need to be putting deers killing people in books, but just thinking about how we always make the deer the innocent, sweet animal and the wolf scary. And I have this from some of the research I did. Stories shape our perception of animals, and our perception of animals shape our public policies. So like, they're having a lot, there's the red wolf in the southern East Coast now. They're trying to do all these conservation projects with them, but they're having a lot of trouble because people don't want wolves in their area. And then I put this example in here. I thought these top books, I think, are really interesting. They try and address the like, you know, like, let's look at the wolf from another point of view. But some of them, like, the joke is still kind of like, oh, the wolf's the good guy here, but there's still kind of that undertone of like, oh, they might eat you. You know, there's still, that's like where the humor is coming from.
Sure.
So it's interesting. I'm glad people are doing this, but it's interesting to see that it still kind of has a little bit of that, like, even though they're addressing the stereotype, it still kind of has that underlying humor coming from like, they're the bad guys. And then there's a bunch of books in this realm now showing how important predators are to ecosystems. So these are great because that's like one of the ways that we've learned to build empathy for animals, is showing how important they are to the ecosystems. But I think it's interesting that these are all really pure, they seem to be all really like pure nonfiction, or very close to nonfiction. And then this fun whatever is still has a little bit of that stereotype. So I'm wondering if there's like a space in the middle of these two, where a story about wolves or sharks or some other carnivores might live, so that you get, you know, like, there's a certain kind of kid who's going to want this bottom row of wolf's books, and a certain type of kid who wants that top row. Is there somewhere in the middle that's going to make kids love wolves? And, you know, this top row, I think, for sure, is still going to get certain kids interested in wolves and have them like wolves. So they're still doing their job. I just think maybe they're somewhere in between there. This one is like such a pet peeve of mine, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but there's so much bad biogeography in kids' books where like tigers and sloths live together, even though they live on opposite ends of the world, penguins and polar bears. And I use Disney as an example. Is that me making noise?
Yes.
Let me close an app open I didn't know was open. So, you know, these anteaters in Africa, and the Lion King, which is crazy because they live in South America, the orangutan in India doesn't make any sense. I still have friends that are adults from these Coke commercials as kids that think penguins live at the North Pole. So it's like, why? Like, the reason this one bothers me so much, even though it's like probably not going to make or break how someone does conservation in the future, it's like so simple to research, and like it rarely affects the story. So that one I think is crazy.
Well, and just to piggyback off this point, I think that when you're talking about kids, especially, you know, they take this, whatever's happening in the illustrations, as the foundation for what they believe is true about the world. Now, if you have a story where clearly the animals are acting like kids, they're wearing clothes, they're going to school, then you can mix a
Right.
tiger and an orangutan and a penguin in the same classroom, because it's clearly they're all just representing kids, really. But when there's a story that is taking place in the animal world,
Right.
to me anyway, that's kind of the dividing line. If kids know for a fact that this story is clearly made up, it's, bears aren't really wearing clothes and sitting in a desk in school, then we can suspend disbelief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm skipping ahead a little bit because I talked about that a little more, but I'll go back to the
Mm,
other stuff.
great.
I actually analyzed, I want to do more, but I don't have the time, but I analyzed a bunch of books about tropical forest ecosystems just because I had to narrow it down to try and understand where I wanted these rules to be broken and where they couldn't. And I looked at if they're wearing clothes, are they talking? And like, I made these whole charts and whatever. And in the end, like, I realized all I want authors and illustrators to do is like follow the rules of the world you've created. So if your animals are, even if they're talking, if they're living in a world that seems like an animal world and they're real animals, then it should seem like an animal world. If they're flying planes, then they can all mix up because they're flying planes and it's reasonable to assume that they would be living together. So these are some examples where these animals are living in human-like cities. Of course, they're going to be like all mixed from all over the world. And then these are two good examples, like you mentioned, where they like obviously are addressing why these animals are in different, like why they're not where they're supposed to be. And that's like the basis of the story. So that's not going to confuse kids because they're talking about it in the story. I think these concept driven books, like it makes sense that these, like obviously these black and white animals from all over the world would work together in a factory, like that makes sense. Kids aren't going to think that they,
Sure. Right.
and a concept book that's more just about different animals, like again, that makes sense. I think Winnie the Pooh is like a really interesting example because he's following the rules of his world. Like this is a kid's imagination and his toys. So of course a tiger and a kangaroo and an owl can live together, but it still feels like a real world to a lot of kids. I think this was funny. I was playing with my 3-year-old nephew and he had a bunch of pretend little animals or like those plastic animals. And there was a kangaroo and a frog he was playing with. And then there was also a bunny in the pile. So I was like, oh, what other animal hops? And he picked up the tiger, very realistic looking tiger, and had it hopping
Oh no.
on his tail, which I mean, he's going to learn that that's not
Sure,
real. It's
sure.
fine. But I just think it's interesting because this is like, I give him, and he's following the rules of the world he created. So I'm okay with this one, but it's interesting because I do think kids could still get some misconceptions of this one because they're in the woods all the time. Sorry, I'm going to go back because I skipped ahead because I want to bring that up. So in this analysis I did of rainforest books, one of the things I looked at was like the biodiversity that was showing up in the books. So this is what the breakdown was. I think it was 36 books that I looked at that fit into whatever I set up at the beginning. So this was that breakdown of biodiversity in the picture books. And then I don't know if this is in your way or not. Sorry, I can't tell if mine.
No, you're fine.
So this was from one study that had kids draw what they thought was in rainforest, which I thought was interesting, that it's pretty similar with the mammal and bird and reptile breakdown, but they actually represented bugs more than we do as picture book makers. And then this is a comparison to the actual biomass of tropical forests by species, or by species and by biomass. And you can see like we totally underrepresent bugs, and not saying that we have to write every book about bugs, but it's like worth thinking about that we're not really, we're kind of overemphasizing how important mammals are or birds or reptiles and not really thinking about how these ecosystems really exist. So it's just worth thinking about why we do this. This was a study about the most charismatic animals, and charismatic animals are the ones people tend to be really excited about and usually people's favorite animals. And I haven't, done an analysis of a bigger range of books, but on the tropical rainforest books I did, it pretty much matched you know, all the animals that would fall into that realm, and even some, you know, lions and giraffes and zebras don't actually live in tropical rainforest, but they show up in a lot of the books for them. So it pretty much matched that small sample that I had when it was relevant. And I feel like, you know, just from looking at the market, these are the animals we constantly see in books. So this, and there was quotes, they even used, here, I like this quote from this article, I'll just read it, sorry. These tend to be the species that are featured in children's stories. They are part of our upbringing, even if found in countries thousands of miles away. So these tend to be the animals that get all the conservation money and conservation attention too. So it's worth thinking about if we can bring some other species into kids' books at an early age and get some love for the overlooked creatures. So these are, I don't know if you guys have heard of EDGE. EDGE is an organization out of the London Zoo, and it stands for Evolutionarily Distinct and Globally Endangered Species. So these are some of the species that they prioritize and think really need saving that aren't getting a lot of conservation attention. So they're a cool, like, I mean, I think this is a really interesting way to come up with a new book. Like, why not look into some weird species that kids don't know about, that's not really on the marketplace? There's a lot there to explore. They don't really, the only thing about that organization is they don't really focus on insects or like mollusks or anything. It's all vertebrate animals, but there's still a lot of good material to start there. Some really interesting creatures.
Tell us who each of these creatures are in these pictures.
Oh gosh, I don't even know if I know all of them. This is a purple frog, Solodon, pangolin.
Pangolin, yeah, knew that one.
This is a Chinese lizard. I think I'm forgetting part of the name though.
Okay.
I know I should have wrote that down, huh? And I don't remember these guys' names. And this is some kind of sphinx moth.
But you're right. I mean, even if you're writing a fiction story, but you want it to have an animal character and take place maybe in a really interesting location, looking into some of these types of creatures as the character that you're going to write your story around would be very different from a tiger. And then maybe tell me if you're going to talk about this in a second, and then I will hold this. But I was going to ask you, for fiction, do you think it's important that you really research the actual nature of the animal and build your character from that, so that even if they're a talking animal, they still have some sort of behaviors, characteristics that are rooted in the real animal?
I mean, that's like that's also like what drives my ideas too, is just like reading what this animal does and like what's unique. I mean, like, think about the Hungry Caterpillar, which is like one of the most popular kids books ever. I was just like fighting with my 5-year-old niece. She was here and I was showing her we walked outside and saw a monarch caterpillar turning to a chrysalis, which, like, how cool is that she happened to catch that? And she's like, not chrysalis, it's a cocoon. I'm like, it's not a cocoon, it's a chrysalis. But she's read a Hungry Caterpillar a million times, so she thinks it's a cocoon. Which is just a silly little thing, but like, was it that hard to get that? I mean, it's an older book, but like, we could get those details right.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So this was really interesting. So one of the papers I wrote and researched was how we can build empathy for non-charismatic animals and like underrepresented species. And as I read all the tools that people are using to do this, I was like, these are all the tools that children's book makers already have. So like, we're the perfect people to be doing this. So storytelling is like one of the most important tools for building empathy for animals, especially, I mean, in adults and young kids. Humor has been found to be a really effective tool, giving the animal agency. So like, I think that's something we're really good at. And this is interesting because it doesn't always necessarily like match the actual behavior of the animal, but we often give agency to things that, you know, may not, like individual molecules or a paper, you know, but doing that, even if it's doesn't 100% represent the behavior of that animal is a great way to sort of introduce a new creature to kids. Anthropomorphism, I hate that word, it's so hard to type and say. But and this is interesting because there's actually a lot of research and argument about doing this with kids, and it kind of goes, it seems like it goes in waves of how popular it is. And like even zoos, I did an internship with the exhibit design department at the Bronx Zoo last fall, which was really interesting because that actually has a lot of overlaps with children's book writing, I think, also. So it does kind of go in waves with how trendy this is, but there's different, what I realized, everyone talks about it in research papers and in general, like as if it's like 1 or 0, true or false, and it's kind of a scale, you know, you can have, there's like the Berenstain Bears where they're fully dressed and acting like humans, and then there's just like a book where they're in the wild and they're talking because you need to understand what they're thinking. So there's like a very range of how you're doing that. This was an interesting study, drawing parallels to humans, but in a way that was very still representative to how the animal acted. So they would do things like say, the shark looked for its meal, just like we're gonna go home and eat dinner later or whatever. And it would just keep tying it back for kids, but in a like, still keeping them like separate, but it definitely reflected how.
There's several really great picture books for the younger end where they talk about the relationship of animal parents to their young in various different ways. How animal parents protect their young, how they feed their young, and those are great parallels because you've got a little kid who knows that his or her parents are going to protect them if they're scared or if they're sick, and then you see the animals doing the same thing with their young. So that's, yeah, you're right, that's very, very effective.
Yeah. So the ability to show emotion, which I feel like we do in the writing and the illustrations, makes a huge impact. The classic like charismatic animals that we usually like are, they have what they call cuddly charisma, which means they have big eyes that look like human babies. Their head is proportioned like a human baby. And like we do that as illustrators. We try and make things cuter by making their eyes bigger and their heads bigger and their proportions, whatever. So we're already like kind of doing this with things, and we can use that to our advantage for an animal that's maybe not quite as cute. We can, you know, cuten it up a little bit to get some love for it.
I thought that purple frog was pretty cute in the last
Yeah.
picture. I wanted to see a picture book about him.
Readability. So this is interesting. I thought, you know, most of the animals that we consider to be charismatic are the ones that are like easily observed by humans. Like they live in the same kind of spaces as us. They're like the right size. Like butterflies, they're not on the top 20 list, but they're, you know, they're very different from humans, but because they're so colorful and they see our eye range, like we consider them charismatic. So there's a concept of biophilia and biophobia, which I spelt wrong, I see, which is like natural, related to evolution, that we have this, you know, natural connection to nature. And then biophobia is a fear of certain things like animals like snakes and sharks or whatever. And both of them can be kind of used to the advantage because even animals that we're super scared of, we're interested in. We're not like disinterested in. There's like this interest in them because of that fear. So there's a way to kind of use that. For sharks are in the top 20 charismatic animals. So even though a lot of people are scared of them, there's this interest in like, you know, whatever around them. So I think that's interesting to think about when you're doing it. And then I thought this was so cool. They found with scientists and generally like there's some species that people have one interaction with and it's like this altering and they all of a sudden just love this animal. And then there's scientists that study a species for a long time, and the more time they spend with it, the animal becomes charismatic to them. So I think with kids books, it's interesting because when you're rereading these over and over again, I feel like it's a similar kind of concept of a scientist in the field studying this. So I think we kind of have that tool too, where they're going to be more and more familiar with this animal and get all more in love with it. Oh, sorry. I still want to, I think, this was just, how am I doing on time? I'm running out of time.
You're fine.
So this was just an example where I think it's interesting that they kind of went with a generic animal, and they could have done, I recently decided to analyze books about bears too, because I feel like I love bears and we only represent the same like 4 species in all the books.
Right.
And these are 2 super famous bears, and they're supposed to be the like less like he's very clearly a spectacled bear because he's from the jungles of Peru and whatever. And I don't know why he looks like a brown bear. And the same with Baloo, he should be a sloth bear.
Oh,
So it's interesting because I would rather people do generic animals if they don't want to do the research, or if they want it to be more like mystical. I would rather animals be generic than be wrong, like I'd rather him look like a kind of generic, but he looks like a brown bear to me, not like a generic bear. But I'd rather it look like a generic bird than be a South American bird in Africa, But
right.
I do think there's like a missed opportunity here. Like if Paddington really looked like a spectacled bear, how many more people would know about these bears and care about
You're
them?
absolutely right. I never thought of that. But yeah, Paddington is not a generic bear because he's from the jungles of Peru. You're right. So that little detail puts him in a specific geographical place, and therefore he has to be drawn a certain way.
Even
And
though
you're
he
right.
lives in London and like is a city bear,
Yeah, that's fine. But yeah, clearly this is one of those stories where the bear is acting like a human. He's got clothes on, etc. He eats marmalade, but that detail of where he was from should have been reflected in the illustration more accurately. Yeah, never occurred to me. You were right. It's
um,
fascinating.
and then this was the stuff I sort of touched on before.
Yeah.
I had that one, a sample in here, but I love this book. This is one of the only books about spectacled bears, and it could have been a totally generic bear and hummingbird. And he did a really good job of using a very specific ecosystem in the South American mountains jungle. And he even has, which I think is a great STEM tie-in, he has like all the animals that lived in that ecosystem in the back that you can go back through and look for.
Mhm. Mhm.
And he's very stylized illustrations. This is a 4-color process with like bright pink and purple. I love the colors in this. But it's a very stylized bear, but it's very clearly a spectacled bear, which I think is
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
cool.
And you mentioned STEM, and that's really important. Those of you who are maybe new to children's books, STEM is science, technology, engineering, math. And if you add an A and make it STEAM, that's for art. But you might see those terms a lot, STEM or STEAM. Editors are looking for picture books with STEM and STEAM tie-ins because they're used in the classroom. So even if you write fiction, but if you have animals in it that are accurate, you can put back matter in this book with more facts about those animals or their environment. And that's really important now for classroom use. So another reason to, be at least as accurate as possible with these animals.
Well, and that reminded me of one other thing I wanted to mention. I think it's getting a little better, but generally in schools, for a long time, teachers were mostly still picking fiction books
Mhm.
to learn about stuff. That's just what they were more comfortable with, and they chose fiction. And so, in all these research papers about misconceptions from children's books that I was reading, they put the responsibility on teachers and parents to know if these books are accurate, which I think is absurd because
Yeah.
teachers and parents have enough work to do. They're not experts on these, but like, how can they be expected to be an expert on everything that's going to be in a book? If you're writing the book, you should do that to make sure that the teachers have the best tools. Like, I don't know how a teacher is supposed to go through millions of books. And same even with librarians. We can't expect a librarian to be an expert on every single topic. So I think it really should be on the author, illustrator, publisher
Mhm.
that is making sure these books are not
I agree.
misconceptions.
Yep. Totally agree. Totally agree. Well, let's talk just real quick. I do want to get to a few questions here, but we want to hear a little bit about your process and how you create your illustrations. And, you have this wonderfully colorful, sort of stylized art, but you still have this accuracy in there. So how do you blend those two characteristics in your own art?
Yeah, I don't know. Let me, I do have some pictures that I can maybe go through if we wanted to. So this is an interesting example, I guess. So for Love in the Wild, this was my little cousin came out as trans, I guess 4 or 5 years ago now, and I wanted to make him something. And we used to go to the zoo together all the time when he was really little, and I just wanted to, and like he kind of introduced. I was like when he was like 3 years old, he was like, oh, the capybara and all these like animals I didn't even know yet. So he kind of like got me interested in kind of lesser known animals. So I really wanted to paint him something, an animal, and I was like, oh, what's a like LGBT animal? And I started researching, and there was just it was so interesting, all these kind of same-sex behaviors in the animal kingdom, and I just thought it was so cool. So I'm trying to make the animals somewhat accurate or recognizable as the real animals. And I was very influenced by their actual behaviors. But I wanted to also make it like pride friendly. So I'm tying in all these like rainbow colors and hearts, like about love. So there's a lot of hearts going through the illustrations and shapes. So I was kind of thinking about the compositions, if there's a natural way to make a heart with the animals, and like the fun ways I could tie in the different colors. This clownfish, it's totally wrong colors, but it's the right like layout of colors. And I thought they actually change sex if the lead female dies, the biggest male becomes female. So I thought that would be cool to do the little, because they kind of looked like the same setup as the trans flag in there. And
yeah, so basically, when a child is looking at these illustrations, that this is representative art. It's not technically, it's not meant to be realistic, photorealistic art.
Right.
It is stylized, it represents the creatures, but in a very artistic way. But the behaviors in the book that you depict, that is what you are being accurate about. I remember I read, it must have been a blog post you wrote about this book, where you said very few, there are so many nuclear families of animals in children's books with a mother, a father, and children. And in the wild, a lot often it's the mother who raises the children alone, the offspring alone, or with the help of another female, and the male kind of does his thing and then leaves. So I thought that was really interesting, to just be aware of those kinds of things in your illustrations.
And I understand that we use animals as a way to like represent humans sometimes, and we might want to like break those rules. But like for the clownfish, for instance, was like so interesting. I was like, why did they chose to do a father when like the mom dies right at the beginning, and so like immediately that male should have turned into a female, but they chose to make him a father. If they had just chose to make it a female, it would have made like more sense, which like it didn't ruin the movie for me. I wasn't like whatever, but it was just an interesting choice. And I guess with after doing this research and like with the diversity in human families, like why not try and show some of the diversity and other stuff?
Sure.
The reason the animals were so interesting to me was because I had so often heard the argument that there's no gay animals, so it's like not natural. And it's like, well, actually, there's like so much interesting stuff.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So I know that, and again, I do want to get these questions, but I'm sure there are illustrators who are wondering about your process, how you create your illustrations, what mediums do you use, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I was going to scroll through this really quick, but
sure. Whatever. I love looking at your art, so no problem.
I'll go through, I'm going to skip all the inspiration stuff, but I'll go. So this kind of show you how I sort of start my process of figuring out the book.
Okay.
So this is like those little thumbnail pages that I start with. And So I used to do everything like draw by hand and scan and then crop and Photoshop and move around. And now I've been doing all the sketches on my iPad and it's like way faster. It's really nice.
Mhm.
So these are my initial thumbnails for that Jungle Book. And some of them stayed very close to like what they were. And some of them, had a lot of back and actually only a few of them had some back and forth. So this one, everything is kind of painted, all the textures, everything is painted or hand drawn with a color pencil. And then I kind of collaged it back together digitally.
Hmm.
So this was actually at the bottom right, the blue, was me playing with some inks trying to make like a river texture, but I was like, oh, it actually is like such a cool snake skin texture. It kind of like I was going to do a really representative snake, but it kind of felt like the vibe of that snake skin without being so representational. So I ended up just changing the color and putting it in there. And so that's like a good example where it's not exactly the pattern of that skin, but it very much like from far away gives that feel.
Right.
So that was kind of from sketch to that one was we all liked the sketch right away. So it was very similar. And then this was one that I was struggling with. So this book was interesting because the kids are imagining themselves in a jungle every day. And so I actually, with my own rules, would have been okay to have mixed jungle animals in this one because they're sort of like just imagining it in their everyday life. But the author actually picked all Central African animals except for one.
Huh.
I thought that was really weird. And I was like, can we just change this? Before I agree to do it, can we change this one animal to a Central African animal? And they were okay with that. So like, I would have been okay if it was all mixed, but it was, so this one, I really felt like we needed some relevance back to the real world for this spread because we had a bunch that were like full imagination spreads. So we went back and forth because they weren't really liking the connection from my real world to the imaginary one that much. And then they really liked this one finally. But I had another spread that actually was a playground spread, so I had to change that one. But that one was an easier, I had came up with an idea to change that one pretty quickly. So this little butterfly boy was initially on the playground, and then I was like, oh, he can be in the library and the books can look like butterflies. And so that was an easy switch. And then I had initially started where I wanted the like real world to be grayscale pencil, and then it kind of transitioned into this full color jungle world. But since we ended up doing quite a few like full jungle spreads, we ended up cutting that and just making everything full color. So yeah, I would probably make my life easier if I committed to like one single media and process every time, but I am like, I was like, oh, this book needs this and I want to do this for this. So I like to change it up.
Yeah, it's lovely. It's lovely. And before we get to the questions, you said you scan through a lot of inspirational stuff. Were those things that you use for inspiration? When you said you were skipping through?
Oh yes, I was. So I kind of showed some examples of. I mentioned before that I like go to the library like crazy. So I actually had gone to Central Africa, so I had a bunch of my own pictures, which was great, and it was awesome because I probably had a better understanding of the background animals and plants than I would have if I had not gone there, like some of the weirder to find ones. And I was saying I pulled from the title, the cover ended up looking like this was I drew when I got back from Africa because I didn't want to be at work. I just wanted to be back in the rainforest. So, I mean, the cover, very different style, but kind of was inspired by that little drawing I did when I got back. And I even I really wanted these hippos and was like short on time. So I repainted them, but stole the same position of my hippos from a fabric for the back of the book. And then these were two books that I thought, this is such a classic example of like imagination growing into a jungle. And then this one I thought was really done nicely about like being in an urban space and a kind of forest, wild place going around you. So those were two that I just kind of looked at for overall inspiration.
Great.
And then I also wanted to look at books that kind of showed the imagination. So these were examples of that.
Right. So this is just so important because we talk a lot about, we tell writers a lot to study mentor texts to learn how to tell their stories. But you're not necessarily mentor tests, but you're looking at other books for inspiration, like you said, to get different ideas. And I think that maybe sometimes artists are, especially if they're starting out, are afraid to do that. They're afraid, oh, I'm going to just copy someone else. But really it's just informing your art, correct?
Yeah, and I actually know some professional artists that still do that. Like I'm like, look at this book, look at this book. And I'm the exact opposite where I look at like so many things, there's no way I can copy anyone because there's like 8 bajillion, like maybe copy
Right.
a little bit of 10 million things, but
Mhm.
and if there is something I really like am drawn to, or sometimes with like I need a really specific animal pose and there's no reference, I make sure that I can find at least 2 images that have that pose. So I'm not copying one photograph, and try and like mix a little bit of that. Cause even I don't want to like be copying a photographer either. So even if I
Right.
do find one specific thing really inspiring, I make sure that I still am not copying exactly that. And like, that's pretty rare, but the best example is like very specific. If I need a really specific animal pose for reference.
Mhm. Okay, great. Um, Someone asked, how important is color to your storytelling and to your art? Obviously, you love color.
Yeah.
Do certain colors have particular meaning to you in your art?
Um, I mean, obviously with Love in the Wild, color had a more like it was more conceptual because it was the rainbow over and over again.
Mhm.
But yeah, I have a very hard time. It's very instinctual to me, and I am not huge on having to be accurate with the color for the animals. I don't know why I'm okay with breaking those rules. I think it's usually pretty obvious to kids that there's not like a rainbow colored lion mane or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I think there's something, the color is a way to kind of make things pop and stand out a little more and feel more modern. So I feel like there's something that makes it appealing to more people by using certain color
Mhm.
combinations that
Mhm.
uh, allows it to be a little more creative if I'm staying more accurate in other ways.
Sure, and I imagine it depends on the book too. It just the pages I saw from your Animal Olympics book, that looked like they were more realistic as far as the color goes
Yes,
on
and
those.
so I kept very much to the Olympic rings
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
the costume, and I very much looked at, since it's sport, the one side was like animals in outfits and one side was the wild. So I kept the wild very realistic.
Mm-hmm.
And this side I was very inspired by, I tried to pick flags from the areas where these animals are to use for their
Ah,
costumes. So that
mm-hmm.
was, but
Right.
I was trying to a little more primary than I normally go because of the Olympic thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. Um, so you mentioned that some page breaks are set in stone when you receive the manuscript, as you did with the Animal Olympics, and others actually came with sketches. That was the same book, the Animal Olympics. She's asking who does those, the author, the publisher, or both, as far as determining the page breaks. I imagine with Animal Olympics, it was the publisher because they sent you,
Right. This was
uh,
like an in-house developed project.
right. Mhm.
So the publisher had a designer that they had hired,
Right.
and they did the sketches
Hmm.
for that.
Yeah, so that's a very different kind of project. It's almost like what you would get from a book packager. But other times you said you kind of could figure it out, but it was pretty easy from the way the book was written.
Yeah. So with this one, it's like pretty clear because each page is kind of one yoga pose, and it's the text kind of indicates like a hint of what's going to be on the next page. So I have like there's a hint that let me see, I see the ground shaking, quaking, and quivering below me. So there's a hint that the gorilla is going to be on the next page. So I hid the
Oh,
next
yeah.
in each one. So it was pretty obvious like where the page breaks were going to be in this one, besides like the first and last page, which had a little more flexibility. That was pretty clear
Hmm.
in that one.
Yeah, and just to elaborate on this, with fiction especially, you know, as the writer, you can write it and you should write it so that there is a rhythm to your text. So it's kind of implied where the page turns are going to be in your text. But once the illustrator makes those sketches and really lays everything out, you may get some feedback from the editor and illustrator that, oh, we need the page turn to go here instead because it's just paced better. There is some give and take there in how the book is laid out ultimately once the sketches are done.
Yeah, and you're thinking about pacing of the text, and sometimes some text implies a lot more visuals than other does, you know what I mean? So the pacing of the pictures also has to
Sure.
work, you know, like
Yes.
there's a lot of times where I'm like, oh, I always want more page turns. I want 4 spreads for this bit.
Yeah.
But I don't need it here, you know?
Right. It's very much a collaborative process, as you mentioned earlier. And sometimes you may, as the author, think I've got 28 pages here of text that the illustrator is going to illustrate. And then the editor will say, you know what, we really want 2 pages of back matter. We're going to have to shorten it and make it 26 pages of text. And so everything can change. All you can do when you submit your manuscript is give it your best shot as to where you think the page breaks are going when you write it, but be flexible.
Yes. And
oh,
I don't know.
Were you going to add something to that?
I was, and I left my brain immediately.
Okay. Alexine asks, a lot of agents say they don't want stories with animal protagonists. Is this changing? I don't know how much you've had conversations about this with your agent, or if you've noticed this.
It's not changing for me because everyone hires me for animal things.
Yeah, that's what you do.
I haven't personally noticed that, and my agent still seems fine with the 8 bajillion animal books I keep pitching her. So
yes. You know, I see animal books coming out all the time. So I think it's just like, you know, everybody says, editors and agents say they don't want books in rhyme. Well, what they say is they don't want bad rhyming stories. Yeah. You know, they don't want bad rhyme. And it's like, if you base your animal characters on stereotypes and don't really think about the true nature of this character, and then have interesting, you know, characters we haven't seen before, then yeah, your manuscript will probably get rejected. But if you do it the right way, it won't. So it's just like anything else.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, maybe, you know, with all that went on the last few years, and with what's like really trending right now is, you know, emotional books and human stories. So there might be a little more push for some human stuff right now, but I think there's always going to be a balance of.
Absolutely. And I love your suggestion of finding the underrepresented animals, you know, and really.
I was going to say, and I think I skipped it, that when I was first starting, I was getting a lot more pushback on that kind of thing. Like, oh, people aren't desperate for a purple frog book, you know, but that is getting more popular for sure. There's a lot more weird animal books. And I think another way to do it is also think about, like with the bear book, you know, bears are going to be popular. So you can pick a bear that's less represented, you know, you can pick a bear species that's less represented, or you could do, you know, he could have had a friend that was a purple frog, or, you know, some other, like, you know, you could have your big animal that's really popular and going to sell the book. And you could have a secondary character if that makes you more comfortable as a, whatever. And that's why I think doing the research for the ecosystems for all those background animals that fit there will give you a little like wider range of animals that we can have in the background, and introduce kids to more animals.
So your point is have this range of animals, but make sure they're all actually from the same ecosystem.
Unless they're like, you know, flying spaceships, then it's okay.
Unless, yes, exactly. Unless it's clearly a fantasy world that you've created. Yes. This is in reference to something I said earlier. if publishers aren't looking at websites, though art directors may be, how important is it to have a website as an author? Well, what I meant was, and I might have been misleading there, what editors are not doing is saying, I wonder if there's any authors out there who would like to write for me. I'm going to go Google author websites and see if they have synopses of their books. No, because they're getting so many submissions. But art directors are saying, I need someone who can draw a really great gorilla in a colorful style. Let me go on Instagram and see what I can find. So it's just it's a slightly different approach to finding new talent. But as an author, yes, you should have a website, because once you submit to an editor, they will then want to look at your website. Once they have your manuscript in hand, they're going to want to see a little more about you.
It hasn't happened yet, but I am, if you, certain hashtags for certain species that no one cares about, I'm like the only thing there. So if an author ever, if an editor ever says, I need someone to draw, some weird frog from this place, and looks at the hashtag on Instagram, I'll be right there screaming for them.
There you go. Hashtags are important. I never thought I would say that, but they are. Okay. Well, Katy, this has been great. Thank you so much. This has just been so interesting and enlightening, and I'm really looking forward to hearing about all the stories you all start writing about these weird species that we've never heard of. That would be so great.
Thanks for letting me talk too much. Sorry about that.
No, it's great. We love it. We love it. We appreciate your passion and certainly your art, which is amazing. So again, thank you so much for being on here tonight. We've loved it. And thank you all for joining me. And we will see you in 2 weeks. Until then, have a great evening. Good night.
Thanks so much.